Well, hello, Helene.
Matt, how are you?
Okay, how are you doing?
Very good.
So this is a good reminder.
Hi.
Aye.
Opposed?
I
Thank you. Minutes are approved unanimously. Thank you. So then we'll go on to our first formal agenda item, and that is to share with each other some of the themes that came up in our interviews with those individuals and organizations that we had the opportunity to talk to speak with. Who would like to get us started with some of the themes that came up in your conversations?
I can go ahead.
Yes,
Unless
please. Amanda.
Catherine, you'd like to, since.
Oh, no, thanks, Amanda. You go first and I'll follow on. I always hate to be the first one, so you go ahead.
I know, I just figured I'd take one for the team here and go first. But no, so I just appreciate the opportunity to get to speak with so many stakeholders. It's very informative and really important, this role that we take on in conducting this performance evaluation. So I just am appreciative of the privilege it is to get to do this. I think, there's a lot of consistency with the past performance evaluations, but of course, in the time of COVID, everything was quite pronounced, and certainly the conversations were all about the work of BESE surrounding COVID. So I would say a few things very consistently, as we've heard in the past, is the commissioner's accessibility. And really every single person said, whenever I reach out and want to talk to him, I hear back. And so I was left feeling a little bit like, how does he humanly, how does he do this? But anyway, so this notion of accessibility and connection and availability and ability to appreciate the concerns from every stakeholder, from every angle, and really trying to find a solution that's best, that can sort of meet the needs of as many as possible. And so that was quite consistent. And I think even just overarching beyond that was just gratitude and real just sort of understanding of sort of what the role of the commissioner needed to be this past year during the pandemic, and how he rose to the occasion and was a steady hand, and was able to, again, move the Commonwealth forward, again, without, as no one had, a blueprint for it. So there was just a lot of folks who were appreciative of that, of like how just this adaptability and flexing during the year. So that came out loud and clear, and I think is just a testament to the tenacity and focus of the commissioner in moving us through this as a Commonwealth as best as possible, and a real appreciation for, once again, like there was no roadmap for this. So, really appreciate that. So that came out very strongly and very consistently across everyone that I spoke with. I think relative to the question on the priorities, I think the reality is that the perception and experience across those was that they just weren't, the department, the commissioner wasn't able to sort of as consistently move forward on the priorities for very obvious reasons. And so I think there's just a question of how do we get back on track with those, if those are the priorities. And so sort of more of a future orientation of like what happens now with the priorities and otherwise. So I think on areas of opportunity, I also think this is consistent from other years, is the continued work of the commissioner from an internal perspective and the leadership and management of the department. I think that from what I heard, that there was such an intense focus on the external, the weekly, almost daily meetings with superintendents, et cetera, that there was some internal work that was left to teams to figure out, or maybe didn't have the information they needed to make decisions and support the field, et cetera. So that came out, and I think it's something we've heard in the past around this work that needs to be done to build the culture of the department under his leadership. So that came out. I think last, I'll just say that there are a lot of ideas around the last question of post-pandemic, well, post as much as we can be. And I think there are a lot of ideas there that maybe weren't as consistent, but I think there was so much energy around it that I think it's worth taking note that there was a lot of ideas around where does the department go from here, given the impact of COVID on our communities, on our schools, and of course, all the stakeholders, the children, the families, the educators, et cetera. And so that stands out to me as an area that we can address as we go forward with, our evaluation of his performance. So I will just stop there because I think that came out as sort of the main things that I heard.
Okay, thank you very much, Amanda. Is this meeting recorded? And if it isn't, should it be?
I did not hit record because when it live streams, it records automatically.
Okay, all right, good, awesome.
So
Thank you. I just didn't want to miss anything. I
I
know that
appreciate that.
Rhoda's taking feverish notes, as am I, but I didn't want to miss any of the pearls of wisdom that will come from our conversation. Catherine, how about you next?
Thank you. Again, like Amanda said, there are some consistent themes, although I feel like the praise for the commissioner's focus, consistent amongst all the different people that I talk to. And one of them is not antagonist of the board or of BESE, but said, I'm never a fan of the department or the bureaucracy. But I feel like what Jeff did was, having an open door and communicating. I've never seen anyone do it better in a time of crisis. And this person also pointed out that having this kind of clear for the variability in the health guidance, that this was something that he'd love to see continue, was the level of communication. As Amanda says, I don't know how Jeff keeps that kind of pace of daily communication going in the future, but that was certainly something that he's crediting with, so much more clarity than a lot of other states experience. So I feel like that was amazing, and something that is to be, noted specifically for this year, getting through the crisis. The second thing that was a theme was the fact that we didn't discontinue, that Jeff kept going on some of his other initiatives during this time and didn't suspend, activity on those. I heard a lot of praise out there for our continued focus on principles and leadership, that the strategies are well communicated to everybody, and that Jeff has been consistent in moving and advancing those initiatives. So I thought that was really good. One board member that I talked to had mentioned that he felt a lot of the things that we were doing this year were a lot clearer because of the more frequent emails that we were getting from Jeff too, informing us of what was going on. So I think communication is definitely something that we should be giving the commissioner a lot of credit for, over and above the course of duty. Managing during the pandemic, obviously, but laying the groundwork for what comes next. And having one person that I talked to said, there's going to be a lot of superintendents that retire after school gets underway. And he feels that there's confidence that Jeff as a leader is someone that they can turn to as they're doing these individual searches across the Commonwealth. So I thought that was an interesting perspective as well, that it wouldn't have jumped out at me, how much the field relies upon the department for that sort of consistency and leadership. And in terms of things that we can do better, I think it was, or continue doing, it's just the continued communication and support that everybody that I talked to seemed to be singularly hitting that same note. So I thought that was great feedback. So again, that's what I had heard.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Matt, how about you next?
Thanks. And James, for some reason I keep having something come up on my screen. My internet's unstable, so just
Okay.
like wave your hand or something if you're having problems, and I can
Okay.
always just. I'm sure there must be some dial-in. One day someone will explain how I can be sitting literally 2 feet from my router, which is next to the modem, and still have internet problems. But first, I just want to say, I think there's 3 key themes that Amanda summarized that I think sort of perfectly were summarized, and I think sort of Catherine kind of added an additional one. So I don't have anything new. I do want to go on the record, though, with kind of what I think are 3 constant themes. The first, as both Amanda and Catherine said, it surprised me how consistent people were in effusively praising Jeff over the last year. Catherine made a comment, about someone who sort of normally blasts sort of BESE or the commissioner. There were a couple of people I spoke to who I just assumed would be critical, and it was the opposite. And they were specific why. Number one, as I think Amanda had said, he's just available like at any time of the day or night, including, 10 o'clock calls with parent groups, not groups that he put together, groups that he was asked to speak to. And there was just incredible appreciation to his being open to hearing from people, giving out his cell phone and things like that. And sort of secondly, there was this notion that not simply, it was a hard year. Look, it was a hard year for a lot of people. And, there are a lot of people who seriously suffered and had death. But to be state education commissioner, when you don't have direct control over so many things that happen in districts, and Jeff just sort of kept at it, changed things he did along the way when they weren't working. I mean, there's just incredible appreciation for that. And I thought there was a comment that sort of summed up kind of the push and the pull that Jeff faces as commissioner. One person I spoke to said, there are times I wish BESE would have been a few weeks earlier with coming forward with some guidance. And then this person said, of course, I wish they'd won. And the person laughed, saying, like, you can't win sometimes. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say, I think Amanda brought up internal management. I'm going to put this in my words. It would never occur to me that a leader of an organization the size of and complexity of BESE with the number of employees of BESE could proceed without having, a COO, whatever you want to call it, someone that could really leverage the leader of the organization. I think you could have organizations a whole lot smaller than BESE, and you still need kind of that strong leveraging of the leader. And whether that's something that needs to be strengthened for Jeff, or just something that would be, better for everyone involved, one way or another, Jeff should be better leveraged, and the organization would be better off with a structure of someone who can focus internally while Jeff focuses so much externally. And that's both that I got. The third thing I'd say is there were a number of comments that, yeah, I mean, you obviously can't be on the same track you're on as an organization when you have a pandemic like this for the year, but there was still progress on a number of key initiatives of the department. But I think it's fun. It's actually very admirable to have progress on those initiatives, because you could just be consumed by the pandemic issues. But more than one person said something about refreshing the strategic plan and key priorities going forward. And in fairness, that's one of the goals that, in Jeff's memo last year, he said would start kind of a relooking at the strategic plan would start in the winter of 2021. So yeah, that's great. But I would say that would be needed to bring, not just sort of the vision laid out in our way forward, but sort of a plan, and where appropriate, some very objective, measurable goals. And my point is not every goal should be measurable, but I think it would help bring clarity to a number of organizations and people if there were some goals with quantitative targets. And again, that's both a personal observation as well as, kind of taking what I've heard from some people. If I could make one final point, I'll end where I started. I actually expected some people to be blasting away at Jeff and the department, and it didn't even happen a little bit. There were issues raised. I mean, there were kind of suggestions, feedback, constructive criticism, but there was an incredible sense of appreciation of the department, but of Jeff's role in just constantly being available. And I just want to end on that.
All right. Thank you. So I'll share mine. I'll try not to repeat, and if I do, I'll be very brief. So with respect to the core strategies, almost everyone universally that I spoke with felt that there was some progress with respect to all of the core strategies. However, there were some of the strategies that there was greater success than in others. And one of the areas where it was felt that we continue to make progress was on educator diversity and on the social emotional health of children. And I felt that we really had that he had really done a good job at trying to keep as many of those priorities on target as he could, even in a very difficult time. There was some talk about the digital divide and how early on the challenge was to make sure that all children had access to technology and specific Chromebooks. And there was great appreciation for the fact that he had made it a priority. There was some question about how effective we were in providing technology across the divide. Folks felt like some of the technology arrived later than it should have, but folks were really supportive of his making it a priority especially during COVID. Again, the same theme. Many stakeholders appreciated how he prioritized listening and learning with the field. Always made himself available and accessible. That's something we all heard. There was a lot of talk about his work ethic, how hard he works, and how persistently he works. And then folks added to that yes, he did this hard work during a time where there was no blueprint. There were no pre-existing plans for how to manage through a pandemic of the sort that we experienced. He got kudos for his commitment to children, and in particular the social, emotional, and mental health of children. Folks appreciated the fact that he seemed to have made that a priority during the COVID timeframe. Again, advocated for teacher diversity and continued to support that work. And then the last item I had that seemed to be a consistent theme in most of the conversations was that he was a good listener. but in the sense that not only was he a good listener, but he also sought the opinion of others, which I got a couple of times from folks that I interviewed, that he went out of his way to solicit the opinions of others, and folks felt like that was indicative of deep caring on his part, that he really wanted to know what others thought as he was trying to think through some of these decisions that he had to make. So those were the themes that came up in my interviews. Does anyone feel like there's something that they wanted to share, but had missed sharing, just in order to complete our review and notes with respect to what came up in your interviews?
I just wanted to add one more thing, just to emphasize Matt's comments about the sort of strategy and priorities for moving forward being more clear. I did hear that on a few occasions. And so I did want to raise it up again, because since Matt had mentioned it and I heard it a few times, it seems like something to raise up a bit.
Yeah, it seems that the commissioner, the feeling was that he did a really good job of getting us through the early and mid stages of COVID-19, but folks are wondering what the future will hold, and whether we're going to go back to those core strategies and focus in more particularly on them. That did come up. Anything else from anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you very, very much. I know how busy everyone is, and the fact that you took the time to conduct these interviews was really, really critically important. Our stakeholders, one, need to know that we care about their opinions. Many of them were happy to offer their thoughts. And I think that we expanded the number of individuals that we connected with this year over the last 3 years that I think I've been involved in this process. So thank you for your time and your commitment to reaching out to others and getting their views and perspectives, which are critically important to us as we help to guide the commissioner in his work. The next item on our agenda is our next steps in this process. And so I'll share with you the way we've kind of managed this in the past, and then we'll see if folks agree with that as a practice as we move forward. And so in the past, what's happened is Rhoda has taken all of our notes, and she's kind of using a format that we've used in previous years. She's pushed out a draft evaluation. She sends it to me. I then look at it and add my thoughts and amendments and what have you to it. And once that's done, we share it with each of you as members of the committee for your amendments and your thoughts and your insights. That information all flows back to me. I fine tune the evaluation, and we put it in final form. We have a conversation with the commissioner about his performance, and that appointment and conversation is already scheduled. I think it's in mid-June, in the mid-June timeframe. Helene can confirm the date, and then if there's anything that comes out of that, usually I will have that conversation with the commissioner. If there's anything that comes out of that conversation, where he, deeply opposes something that a conclusion we've drawn, a position we've taken, or what have you, then I'll come back to our group. If not, then the evaluation gets finalized, shared with you again before it's presented to the board at our June meeting. The reason for that last opportunity for you to see it is to make sure that everything that we're saying you agree with before it's presented publicly. And we want to make sure that the evaluation is representative of our entire committee's perspectives and feelings about the evaluation. Rhoda, is there anything that I have missed in terms of the process?
Thank you, Chair Morton. One minor issue and then a question for Helene in terms of what the schedule was in the last round. On that point, whether the committee needs another meeting to settle on the metrics, which you'll recall we have done in the past. So, yeah. Helene, I would defer to you on, did the committee have another meeting? Does the committee have another meeting scheduled, or should the committee schedule another? A quick point, you have a board meeting tomorrow, and while Chair Craven is still on the call, I know she has to jump off. During the remarks from the Chair Craven, I would suggest, you probably have this on your notes already, that you ask Vice Chair Morton to just give a report for this committee, that you've had your meetings, you've had your interviews. You don't have to go into all the details of the process going forward, but the bottom line is you will be delivering a report to the board in June for the board's discussion and vote. So that would be nice to just, spend a minute reporting on that tomorrow.
Yeah.
Great.
One final comment. When Chair Morton said I would draft the evaluation, just to be clear, this is a joint effort with him.
Yeah, no.
I'm happy to be the the wordsmith, but this is your report,
yeah,
your committee, and he's leading the show.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to ask one question. I'll ask it to James. I'm not sure you have to kind of answer right now, but there's reference to the metrics, and I assume that's the percent out, the percentage of the total kind of score allocated to each of the criteria. I think it's 4 criteria. I think it's interesting to think about this year, because on the one hand, sort of did it exactly the right way. We have sort of criteria, they're each weighted by a certain amount. But in a year where we're all saying, or at least the feedback seems to be tremendous job on the COVID related stuff. And, it's good. There was progress on a number of the other initiatives. You can't do them all as if sort of COVID never happened. It brings up an interesting question. We have weighting, but if this was a company and the compensation committee was meeting to assess the CEO's review, you'd probably say, at some point we have to override the weightings that we put in place a year ago because they are not as relevant as we thought. Now, I'm not prejudging that, because I don't know how this will all sort out in the draft that the two of you put forward, but it's something to think about as you go through the review for Jeff. So that's it.
No, that's a tremendously good point, because no matter what we set up coming into this year has been so woefully different than we expected it to be. That I think we'll have to make some adjustments in our ultimate assessments and in the way in which the evaluation is presented. It's almost as if we have to take one of our questions and do a pre-COVID, kind of post-COVID or during COVID approach to it. But I think that answers Rhoda's question to you, Helene, and that is that if we don't have at least one more meeting, we need one, because we probably should look at those metrics and see what we think, and how we're gonna balance out his time pre-COVID and his time during COVID, and evaluate him on the basis of his performance in those 2 very distinct periods of time, I would think, in some ways. So if we could get one more meeting, I suspect that the best timing for that would be once we have a pretty solid draft of the evaluation, for consideration, but just before we meet with Jeff, I would think. Doesn't give us a lot of time. It gives us about, 2 weeks max, I think.
Okay, I'll work on scheduling another time.
Yeah, thank you. I think I had in my head that we were going to meet, that I'm meeting with Jeff on or about the 15th of June. I remember that correctly?
Yep, it was 15th, 18th, somewhere around there. I have to double check. I don't see it on there, but I might be missing it.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, very good. So I think for our purposes, we have covered just about everything that we needed to cover for this time. Anything else that you can think of, Rhoda, that we need to focus on?
I think you and the committee have covered it. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Well, one thing I like about our work together is we make very efficient use of time. And so thank you very much for your participation today and all your input. And as I indicated earlier, thanks for spending the time talking to stakeholders. I think it's important for them and it's important for us. And it's also important for the work we're doing on behalf of the children and families of the Commonwealth. So thank you for your great work. And we'll get another scheduled appointment time and look forward to your insights and thoughts on the evaluation itself. All right. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.